Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Guess who's visiting India? The foreign minister of Ukraine, the one who tried to troll India for buying Russian oil. Now he's calling India partner and friend. What explains this U-turn? What does he want from New Delhi, and more importantly, will he get it? We'll discuss that. Meanwhile, the tech world is engaged in a new war over artificial intelligence. Big tech is pouring billions of dollars to acquire companies. We'll bring you the numbers and the trends. Also looking at China's moves in South Asia, they're working on Sri Lanka, the Maldives and Nepal. We'll tell you why India should be concerned about these moves. Why did India's finance minister refuse a Lok Sabha ticket? How much money do you need to contest an election? How big are cyber scams? The Interpol chief says the scammers make $3 trillion a year. Why is the UK suffering from a mental health crisis with a bill of close to $400 billion a year? Why is Japan upgrading its war machinery? What's happening in Togo in Africa? Why is it being called a constitutional coup? How did Saudi Arabia end up leading a UN panel on women's rights? What does it say about the United Nations? And despite growing hunger and rising food costs, why is the world wasting 1 billion meals every day? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Vladimir Putin rules out attacking NATO, but the Russian president warns that Moscow will shoot down F-16 fighter jets sent by the West to Ukraine. Putin says talk of Russia attacking Poland or the Baltic countries is quote-unquote complete nonsense. In India, Prime Minister Modi launches a scathing attack on the opposition Congress party. It comes after hundreds of lawyers wrote to the Chief Justice expressing concerns over attempts to undermine the judiciary. The Prime Minister calls the Congress a party of bullies, saying that's why they keep losing elections. US President Joe Biden ropes in Barack Obama and Bill Clinton for a star-studded New York City fundraiser. The event is expected to raise $25 million, a record haul for any political event. Tickets for the fundraiser range from $200 to $500,000. Thailand sounds alarm after an anthrax outbreak in Laos. Bangkok is closely monitoring its livestock. Laos has reported more than 50 suspected human cases. Anthrax spreads through bacteria in the soil and commonly infects livestock. And a big setback for Mercedes. A German court rules against the auto giant, saying Mercedes deliberately installed emission cheating devices in its vehicles. Car owners can now seek compensation from the company. Nothing is constant in politics, not your allies and certainly not your rivals. All of it changes with time and circumstance. Just ask the government of Ukraine. After Russia invaded, they were upset with India. They had all sorts of questions. Why is India not condemning Russia? Why is India still buying Russian oil? Why isn't Prime Minister Modi asking Putin to pull back? All sorts of emotional questions. But Kiev made no genuine effort to reach out to understand India's position. Until now, that is. Today, Ukraine's foreign minister landed in New Delhi. His name is Dmytro Kuleba. He's on a 2-day visit to India. It's his first as foreign minister, his first visit. And the way he announced this visit was quite interesting. Kuleba uploaded a video last week. It was a montage of 3 things: holy celebrations, himself, and Mahatma Gandhi. I know it sounds strange, but that was Kuleba's message. He linked Gandhi's non-violence to Ukraine's resistance, and today he continued that. He visited Gandhi's memorial in Rajghat. Not a bad idea. Many foreign leaders have taken inspiration from Mahatma Gandhi. It's a good way to connect to Indians. But that alone will not help. Kuleba needs to convince the Indian leadership, and he will have a chance tomorrow. That's when he'll meet Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar. He will hold talks with the Deputy National Security Advisor. But what's the goal here? What is Kuleba hoping to achieve in India? Listen to what he said
to
before
strengthen
landing
the
in India.
Ukrainian-Indian relationship. A week ago, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. They discussed bilateral cooperation, trade, and the upcoming Global Peace Summit. My visit will help put their agreements into action and further develop our ties. Ukraine sees India as an important global power with a powerful international voice. We are confident that close cooperation will benefit both our nations.
So Ukraine considers India to be a global power, a country with a powerful voice, and Kiev wants India to use that voice in Ukraine. Maybe get Russia to stop the war. That's Kuleba's #1 priority. We've told you about a peace summit being organized by Switzerland. It is scheduled for later this year, and Ukraine wants India to attend that summit. But will New Delhi agree? You see, this peace summit is based on Ukraine's formula. Russia has already rejected it. So chances are Moscow will not attend the talks, which is why getting India to attend would be a big coup. I'll give you 2 reasons why. #1, India is a strategic partner of Russia, a country that is yet to criticize Putin's invasion. So having India on the table is big. It would be like one-upping Russia. Reason #2, India is a leader of the global south. It can mobilize opinion among developing nations. We're talking about states in Africa and Latin America, states that are indifferent to the war in Ukraine. But if India attends, all those states could take notice, maybe even take a cue from India. So I come back to the question, will New Delhi attend the summit? Well, the official position has been quite clear. India does not think war is the answer. It would like to see a diplomatic settlement.
We took the position from the start that you are not going to get a solution to this conflict on the battlefield. 2 years have passed. There were many who felt 2 years ago, or somewhere in between, that maybe they could. I think today many of them don't any longer. We have also been the country who have the opportunity to talk to the Russians very frankly and bluntly on this issue. On different aspects, others have used us to pass messages.
Now, a couple of things to note here. 1, India has been playing the middleman for a while. As Jaishankar said, passing messages. And 2, a military solution is unlikely. You need a diplomatic answer. If you add these 2 things, the takeaway is quite clear. India stands ready to mediate, to bring an end to this horrible war. But for that, Ukraine needs to do a lot more. For starters, it needs to earn India's trust. There's a big deficit right now, and Kiev has contributed to that. Just look at some of their past statements. The first was in 2022. Kuleba himself made this remark. He said India's Russian oil imports had Ukrainian blood. The second came during the G20 last year. After a lot of haggling, New Delhi got a joint declaration, but look at how Ukraine reacted. Nothing to be proud of. Those were their words. They thought the statement was easy on Russia. The third comment came after the G20. Zelensky's advisor said India had, quote-unquote, weak intellectual potential. I don't think New Delhi has forgotten these attacks, and one belated visit won't change that. So Kuleba's first job is to repair the damage, to build some trust between both sides, and secondly, to have realistic expectations. India may not be able to get a ceasefire or Russian withdrawal, but India can help elsewhere. Maybe with prisoner swaps, or evacuation corridors, or Black Sea exports, or humanitarian aid. Those are all achievable goals, goals that do not require India to ignore Russian interests. Because let's face it, that is India's red line. Minister Jaishankar mentioned it recently. He said India and Russia have taken extra care to look after each other's interest, and that will not change overnight. So Kuleba has his work cut out. We'll be tracking all these developments closely. And now let's talk about a different kind of war. It is sweeping the global tech space, being fought by the titans of the industry, the likes of Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, and Meta. They're fighting to dominate a new frontier. Artificial intelligence. It's the next big thing. AI-based technology will shape the next decade, and big tech wants to lead this race. Take the case of Apple. Apple has not released any major AI features on its devices. You could say Apple is lagging behind. But behind the scenes, it is making aggressive moves. Apple is talking to Google to use Google's AI program called Gemini. It may be installed in the next iPhone. And in China, Apple is exploring a similar deal with Baidu. That's the Chinese search giant engine. Baidu, it's like China's Google. Why does Apple need it? Because Western tech products do not work in China. So for the Chinese market, you need Chinese AI, and Baidu could provide that to Apple. Now, some reports say the deal is already done and that Apple plans to launch the iPhone 16 soon. The Chinese version of this device will have Baidu's AI bot. It's called Ernie. So Apple is betting on partners to launch AI-based features. It is also building its own capabilities. In the last 1 year, Apple has bought some 32 AI companies. They've bought 32 companies. Why build from scratch when you can just go out and buy? So Apple is on a buying spree. It has acquired more AI companies than any other tech player. Let me show you some numbers. In 2023, Meta, the parent company of Facebook, bought 18 AI-based companies. Microsoft acquired 17 companies and Apple took over 32. And there was no fire sale here. These numbers just show how desperate the big players are. They're investing heavily in artificial intelligence and buying firms left, right, and center. Another example is retail giant Amazon. It is consolidating its AI investments. It's pouring big money into a company called Anthropic. It's a startup. It's a rival of ChatGPT. Amazon had investments in Anthropic. Now it is adding another $2.75 billion. So Amazon's total investment in this company will be $4 billion. And this is the trend. AI companies are the hottest thing right now. They're raising big money, mostly from big tech. Let me show you another list of the major AI companies and their big tech investors. OpenAI tops this list. That is the maker of ChatGPT, OpenAI. It has raised $13 billion from Microsoft and its rival. From Microsoft, that's where they've got this money from. OpenAI has got $13 billion. Their rival is Anthropic, the company I just told you about. It's got $4 billion from Amazon, plus it has investments from Google and Salesforce. Put together, Anthropic has raised some $7.25 billion. Third on our list is a company called Databricks. Again, they work in the AI space. You may not have heard of this company, but for some reason, Databricks excites big tech a lot. Do you know how many big investors it has? At least 5. NVIDIA, Microsoft, Salesforce, Google, Amazon, all of these companies have put money in Databricks. Again, this is big money, which begs the question, why is big tech pouring so much money into AI companies? Why are they making multiple acquisitions? You could say they're hedging their bets. It's not clear what's coming next or who will develop it. So they're casting a wide net, building a foundation to develop better AI products instead of having to start from scratch. That's one reason. The other is the dearth of talent. You see, the AI talent pool is quite limited. So if you cannot get people, you buy the companies they're working for. Look at what Mark Zuckerberg is up to. He's personally poaching engineers. Reports say Zuckerberg is writing personal letters to AI engineers at Google. In some cases, Meta is not even interviewing these candidates. They're being hired straight away. Clearly, good AI talent is scarce. So big tech giants are absorbing the best talent through the back door. It's good for the employees. They'll get bigger paychecks. But this rapid consolidation may also hurt the industry in the long term. It may put all the AI technology in the hands of a few entities, and big tech is already too powerful. Artificial intelligence will only amplify their dominance. Back to India now. New Delhi is facing more challenges in South Asia. A turf war is underway here, a battle between India and China. And Xi Jinping is making no effort to hide his mission. He wants to turn South Asia away from India. But is he succeeding? Tonight, we're looking at 3 neighbors of India: the Maldives, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. We start with the Maldives. Their government made a surprising announcement today. They got drinking water from China, almost 1,500 tons of it. The deal was struck in November last year. A top Chinese official had visited the Maldives. That's when President Mohamed Muizzu signed this agreement. But for some reason, it was not announced. Today, Mali went public with it. They announced that the water has already been delivered. And do you know where it came from? The glaciers of Tibet. Now, this is very important for the Maldives. We are talking about a nation of islands and sandbars. They have very little groundwater. So water shortage is a major problem there. It's a national security issue. In 2014, India stepped in to solve the problem. There was a huge fire at the Malé water complex. So the government reached out to India and the response was swift. New Delhi launched Operation Neer to rush drinking water to the Maldives. The first plane landed within 12 hours. In total, India donated around 2,400 tons of water. And thus crisis was averted. But now Muizzu has turned to China. Is there precedent for such a move? We go back to 2014. China too had rushed water supplies to the Maldives. They gave some 1,000 tons of it. So this has happened before, but the timing and context are very different this time. 2014 was a crisis. The Maldives needed all the help they could get. But this shipment is not like that. It was planned and agreed upon in advance. And it fits with Muizzu's broader agenda. He wants the Maldives to look beyond India for healthcare, for military needs, for loans, and for infrastructure. The question is, should water be any different? Well, logically, yes, it should be different. China is much farther away from India, from the Maldives. So the shipping time and cost will be a lot higher. Does Muizzu not know this? Or does he not care? I guess we'll have to wait and find out. In the meantime, let's look at the second Indian neighbor on our list, and that is Sri Lanka. Now, what are they up to? Sri Lanka's Prime Minister was in China this week. He had a meeting with Xi Jinping. Xi called for deepening the strategic ties between both these countries.
China is willing to work with Sri Lanka to carry forward the spirit of independence, self-reliance, solidarity and mutual assistance, reflected in the Rubber Rice Pact, consolidate political mutual trust, strengthen the exchange of governing experiences, expand practical cooperation, jointly advance high-quality Belt and Road cooperation, and continuously deepen the China-Sri Lanka strategic cooperative partnership that reflects sincere mutual assistance and lasting friendship.
So what did Colombo get from this visit? A couple of things. First, some clarity on debt relief. You see, China is Sri Lanka's biggest bilateral lender. They owe $7 billion to Beijing, which is around 17% of total foreign loans. But Colombo is having trouble repaying. They ran out of foreign exchange in 2022, so the government is seeking help from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. Just one problem, though. The IMF says, restructure your Chinese loans first. Then we will bail you out. Now, China has not publicly agreed to restructuring its debt. But Sri Lanka's Prime Minister says Beijing has agreed to help. That's the first thing. The second is more investments. China has promised to develop two major projects. One is the Colombo International Airport. It was supposed to be expanded by Japan, but the plan was put on hold after the crisis in 2022. And looks like China is stepping in now. The second is the Hambantota port. China already has a 99-year lease on this port, but now Beijing wants to expand it. You can bet India won't like this. New Delhi already fears that Hambantota could host Chinese military, so expanding it is quite controversial. Finally, the third neighbor on our list, that is Nepal. Their foreign minister traveled to Beijing this week. He held talks with China's top diplomat Wang Yi. And what did they discuss? The Belt and Road Initiative. Nepal signed up for the BRI in 2017. 2 years later, China gave them an investment plan, a blueprint of various projects. But Nepal's parliament has not seen it yet. Meaning, no one knows what the projects or terms are. It's all shrouded in secrecy. But instead of solving it, Nepal's government is pushing on. They are looking to sign the BRI implementation plan, basically to kick off the projects. Reports say it could be signed by May this year, May 2024. Now, all of this is happening at lightning speed. On March 4th, Nepal's Prime Minister scrapped his coalition. He dropped the pro-India Nepali Congress Party. Instead, he allied with communist factions that are closer to China. And weeks later, there is progress on BRI. All these developments make one thing clear. India cannot take the neighborhood for granted. China will use money, ideology and power to challenge India every step of the way. So it's time to be vigilant and maybe think out of the box. And staying with India, let's look at some election news here. All major parties are busy picking candidates. It seems like everyone is angling for a ticket. Well, maybe not everyone. India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman does not want a ticket. And guess why? She says she doesn't have the money. Sitharaman belongs to the ruling BJP. Her party president did offer her the chance to contest. She says her options were down south, either Tamil Nadu or Andhra Pradesh, but she turned it down. And listen to why she made that decision. I'm quoting, "After thinking over a week or 10 days, I just went back to say, maybe not. I do not have that kind of money to contest. It's also going to be a question of various other winnability criteria that they use." Now, that's a big admission, especially for someone like Nirmala Sitharaman. She's one of the top ministers in the government of India. She handles a $3 trillion economy, and she's also part of India's National Security Council. Yet she says, I don't have the money to contest the election. Which raises two questions. One, doesn't a minister have to be a lawmaker? Well, yes, Nirmala Sitharaman is a member of India's upper house of parliament, that is the Rajya Sabha. Her term will expire only in 2018. So if the BJP returns to power, she can become minister again. She doesn't have to contest for a Lok Sabha seat. Question number two, how much money do you need to contest? We looked at the finance minister's affidavit. She has declared assets worth 2.6 crore rupees, which is around $311,000. But the parliament average is much higher. It's almost 38 crore rupees per MP, per member of parliament, 38 crores. So there are two ways of looking at it. Yes, almost 80% of Lok Sabha MPs are crore-patis, meaning they have crores of rupees, which means money is also very important. But 20% are also not crore-patis, which means factors beyond money also make an impact. Tonight, we'll discuss the money. How much is a candidate allowed to spend? For a Lok Sabha seat, the limit is 95 lakh rupees, which is $113,000. That's how much one candidate can personally spend. If the constituency is smaller, the cap also falls. It is set at 75 lakh rupees. Then you have state assembly seats. Obviously, these are smaller than Lok Sabha seats. Therefore, the cap is less. It can range from 28 lakhs to 40 lakhs. It depends on how big the constituency is. And what does this spending include? Things like campaigning, public meetings, rallies, advertisements, posters, campaign vehicles. All of this must be under the spending cap. And who will verify this? The Election Commission of India. All candidates must file their expenditure after the polls. The Election Commission will check if the cap has been violated, but most candidates don't. They don't violate. Do you know why? Because spending limits only apply to candidates. Parties can spend as much money as they want, and they spend a lot. Let me show you numbers from the 2019 election. The BJP spent around 27,000 crore rupees. Now, as you know, the Lok Sabha has 543 seats. So we did the math, and it comes out to almost 50 crore rupees per seat. That's what they spend. The main opposition Congress spent between 7,000 and 12,000 crores, which is up to 22 crores per seat. These are mind-boggling numbers. They are nowhere near the spending cap. And this is not limited to India. Winning an election has become more expensive across the world. Take the US midterm elections. Candidates spent $16 billion in the last one. $16 billion. That's twice the Lok Sabha spending in 2019. And you can see why this is a problem. Most individuals cannot muster this kind of funds. They will need corporate help. And with that help comes undue influence. So all democracies need to review themselves. Because this was supposed to be a system for the people. I don't remember it being for the rich people. Our next story is about scams, cyber scams. They're worth $3 trillion a year. And Southeast Asia has become a hub for them. This is according to the Interpol, that's International Criminal Police Organization, Interpol. It is headquartered in France and it has been tracking the rise in cyber crime. Yesterday, their chief was in Singapore. He said cyber scam gangs are making up to $3 trillion every year. 3 trillion. The number is ridiculous. There are only 7 countries that have a GDP higher than this. Country number 8 is Italy, and Italy's GDP is about $2.1 trillion, which means either the cyber gangs are making more than sovereign nations, or this number is an exaggeration. The 3 trillion amount is not just proceeds from cybercrime. It counts earnings from drug trafficking, illegal arms sales, car theft, basically every crime that you can think of. Organized criminals are making $3 trillion every year across all their activities. Only a part of this is cybercrime, but that does not make it less of a threat. Cybercrime is growing rapidly, and a lot of this is down to cryptocurrencies. You may have heard of pig butchering. Pig butchering, it's a term used to describe a popular crime these days. Studies say that billions have been lost to pig butchering scams. Now, for those of you who don't know, here's how it works. Scammers get in touch with the victim online. They often target lonely people with promises of friendship or love. And many people were lonely during the pandemic era lockdown, so they became easy prey for the scammers. These people build a bond and then convince the victims to invest in cryptocurrencies. They will give links to fake cryptocurrency exchanges. Now, these may look like legitimate apps or websites. You may not be able to tell a fake crypto exchange from a real one. After all, even the real ones are full of numbers and charts and random figures. How hard is that to replicate, especially by a multi-billion-dollar organization? So the scam victims invest their life savings, and they're shown great returns. The money keeps increasing, and the victims often invest more.
As you make astronomical amounts of money trading, it messes with your normal risk perception, I think. You start getting like somewhat high off of it. So you feel like, wow, I can do even more. I can do even more.
Everything looks great until the victims want to cash out. Then the money and the scammer both disappear. This approach, slowly grooming the victim, is like fattening a pig for slaughter. And that is why this scam is called pig butchering. And these scammers are sitting in Southeast Asia. But here's the catch. These scammers are often victims too. Foreigners who've been kidnapped by the cyber gangs, who've had their passports confiscated and forced to work in the scam centers to try and buy back their freedom. It's a form of modern slavery. And tens of thousands are being enslaved thus.
Unbelievable. We're talking about tens of thousands of people, 120,000 victims, human trafficking victims, sent into these centers to operate these scams, these international scams. And they're reaching the entire world. Victims giving up billions of dollars that are being used to fuel these atrocities as a result of these scam centers.
The United Nations says over 120,000 people were trafficked last year in countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, and the Philippines. The victims come from around the world. Scammers lure them by promising high-paying jobs. Some people are kidnapped while on vacation, and then they're forced to work in these scam centers under threat of physical harm.
I tried to escape 4 times within about 20 days. I got beaten really badly every couple of days. That's how it was. But as long as I survived the beatings, I would try to escape.
Cybercrime gangs are expanding their operations. They're kidnapping and enslaving people to fuel this growth. So how can we stop them? Well, part of the responsibility falls on the Southeast Asian governments. They need to crack down on the criminal syndicates. And organizations like Interpol can help provide intelligence. These crackdowns have started taking place already, but a government-led cleanup will take time. And it's unlikely to eradicate these syndicates completely. So the best we can do at the moment is to be careful. If a person you've never met talks to you about crypto, run in the opposite direction. The UK has a mental health crisis. It's costing the country £300 billion every year, which is around $378 billion, almost double the NHS budget. NHS is their public healthcare system. But why is the cost so high? It's because of rising inequality. There's a cost of living crisis. People cannot afford food. They cannot afford heating. According to reports, it's the second most miserable country in the world. And all of this is contributing to a mental health crisis. The NHS wants to tackle it, but it just doesn't have enough money to deal with it. Our next report tells you why the UK cannot afford to ignore this crisis any longer.
Mental health. It is often regarded as a deeply personal issue, but its impact extends far beyond individual suffering. Ask the UK, and they will tell you, mental health is costing the country over $378 billion every year. It's almost double of the NHS budget. How did they calculate this cost? The report considers three main factors: human costs, economic costs, and healthcare costs. In 2022, human costs were estimated at $164 billion. Economic costs were around $139 billion. A total $75 billion were spent on healthcare. One of the most significant contributors is lost productivity in the workplace. Mental illness can lead to absenteeism. You can miss days at work. There can also be presenteeism. That's where employees are physically present but unable to perform their duties effectively. There's also decreased efficiency and lack of motivation. Untreated mental health conditions can lead to unemployment and disability, further exacerbating the economic burden. But while the economic costs of mental illness extend beyond the healthcare sector, the strain on the NHS and other healthcare providers cannot be overstated. Mental health services face chronic underfunding. There is a shortage of resources. This leads to long wait times for treatment, limited access to specialist care, and inadequate support for individuals in crisis. People are left navigating a fragmented system, one that delays their recovery. According to data, mental health accounts for just 9% of NHS spending, but it makes up 23% of the so-called burden of disease. The report even says that the $378 billion figure may not be accurate. The real cost could be far higher. So what's the reason behind this rising mental health crisis? United Kingdom is dealing with growing inequality. There's a cost of living crisis. People cannot afford food or heating. Plus, there are cuts to early support for mental health. That means more people reach the breaking point before they seek help. According to one report, the UK is the second most miserable country in the world. But behind the statistics lie countless individuals grappling with the debilitating effects of their conditions. So the economic cost of mental health in the UK is not merely a statistical abstraction. It is a stark reminder of the urgent need for action. Addressing this crisis requires a comprehensive approach. The UK must invest in mental health promotion and prioritize the well-being of its citizens. Only then can the country cultivate a healthier and more prosperous society.
Our next story focuses on Japan. It is making a sharp pivot away from pacificism. Tokyo is building up its war machine, upgrading airports and ports, and selling lethal weapons to allies. We'll start with the latest announcement, which came today. Tokyo wants to expand some of its vital infrastructure. It has identified 16 airports and ports. These will serve as staging areas for Japan's self-defense forces and the Japanese Coast Guard. In Japan, they don't have an army, they call it a self-defense force. And now facilities are being upgraded for it. A green light from the cabinet is expected soon. The airports will be equipped with longer runways. The ports will get more facilities so that the Coast Guard can use them for supplies. Basically, these are military-level upgrades. It's not clear which facilities will get them, but reports say ports and airports in Hokkaido and Okinawa will be upgraded. And these regions are home to the Naha Airport and the Ishigaki Port. Both are strategically important. They're positioned close to the Taiwan Strait. It's a region gripped by tensions, the Taiwan Strait. China challenges Taiwan routinely. It sends warships and warplanes to the Taiwan Strait. Should China decide to invade, the Taiwan Strait will turn into a battleground, and Japan recognizes this threat. So it's building up deterrence against Chinese aggression. Tokyo is also helping its friends do the same. Earlier this week, it made another major shift. Japan is now ready to sell fighter jets to the world.
These decisions are based on Japan's security environment. And in order to realize a fighter aircraft that meets the necessary performance and to avoid jeopardizing the defense of Japan, it is necessary to transfer finished products from Japan to countries other than partner countries. The review was based on the recognition that we need to secure a position where we can contribute equally to the UK and Italy.
Now, in the global arms bazaar, such defense deals are common, but for Japan, this would be a first. In the past, such exports were banned, but now Japan has unveiled a new policy. It allows the export of lethal weapons, although under strict conditions. Japan will sell weapons only to its defense allies, to countries that have a defense pact with them. Plus, these countries should not be involved in a war. And each transaction will require a cabinet approval. These new rules will pave the way for Japan to sell a new fighter jet. It's called the Tempest. 3 countries are developing this warplane, the Tempest. There is Japan, of course. And then there is the United Kingdom and Italy. Now, reports say this jet will have technologies like artificial intelligence and advanced sensors to help pilots. But the Tempest won't be operational anytime soon. Experts predict it will be deployed only by 2035. So there are still 11 years to go. Yet China is already worried.
China noted the report and expressed serious concerns over this. Given Japan's history of militarist aggression, Japan's military and security moves have been closely watched by its Asian neighbors and the international community.
China is referring to Japan's role in the Second World War. That's when Japan was an imperialist force. It had joined forces with the Axis powers led by Hitler's Germany. The war did not end well for Japan. It was forced into submission and attacked with nuclear bombs. The US dropped these bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and this is what ended the World War. It also led to the birth of a pacifist Japan. Their constitution renounces war. It says Japan will never have a military force, which is why they do not have an army, but a self-defense force. Over the past few years, we've seen a visible dilution of this stand, though, because Japan's threat perception has changed. It looks at China's military expansion with alarm. It fears that a strong PLA could encircle Japan. And these concerns are shared by Japan's allies, too. Hence the preparation, hence the policy changes. Tokyo is well within its rights to respond to these threats. And these new strategic initiatives are a step in the right direction. Our next story is from Africa, from the West African nation of Togo. On Monday, Togo adopted a new constitution. They moved from a presidential to a parliamentary system. On the face of it, it sounds like a good thing. The presidential system has often been exploited, used to impose a dictatorship in many parts of Africa. So a new system with the parliament in charge should be a good thing. But in the case of Togo, that may not be the case. Critics say this move will actually benefit Togo's president, Faure Gnassingbé, whose family has ruled the country for 57 years. Togo's new system may prolong his grip on power. So critics are calling this a constitutional coup. Our next report explains.
On Monday, in one fell swoop, Togo's ruling party changed the rules. They adopted a new constitution and changed the country's government from a presidential system to a parliamentary one.
So there has been a rebalancing of the powers of the head of state and the powers of the president of the cabinet who becomes prime minister. From now on, you win the parliament, you run the country. It's that simple.
The new term of the President of the Republic is 6 years, non-renewable.
It's a new dawn for Togo. The president will now be a ceremonial figurehead. He or she won't be elected by the people anymore. Instead, Parliament will designate someone to fill the post. Togo's lawmakers say that now it is the Parliament that will be in charge. It's a monumental change, coming less than a month before the country goes to polls. Does this mean that democracy is on the rise? You see, Togo is a country that has been ruled by one family for 57 years. The current president, Faure Gnassingbé, is a second-generation autocrat. His father, Gnassingbé Eyadema, came to power via coup and proceeded to rule Togo for almost 38 years. He died in office back in 2005, and then his son took over the presidency. So, by the sounds of it, this is progress. Togo will finally be free of the long-ruling dynasty. If not now, then after 6 years, when the new single presidential term ends. But if that's really the case, why is Togo's opposition furious?
Today, we are also calling on the Togolese people to unite to say no to the changing constitution, which is why we have called our group Don't Touch My Constitution.
Enough is enough. It is over. We are going to fight. Everyone knows they violated Article 52 and 59.
Enough is enough. We've been piling on, accepting the unacceptable for decades.
Togo's opposition thinks that a sinister game is afoot, a plot to keep President Faure Gnassingbé in power even longer. The president took office in 2005. A coup followed his father's death and paved the way for Gnassingbé Jr.'s rise. He has ruled Togo ever since, for almost 19 years now. Togo officially has a presidential term limit, but every few years there's a tweak, and miraculously the term limit gets reset. This has allowed Gnassingbé Jr. to contest and win 4 elections so far. This year we'll see round 5. That is if the constitutional changes don't take effect. Instead of standing for the presidency, Gnassingbé Jr. could try and become prime minister instead. After all, that's the new top job, and it may prove easier to win. Gnassingbé Jr. would just need a winning parliamentary coalition, and he could continue to perpetuate his family's rule for years to come. And that is why Togo's opposition feels a constitutional coup has taken place.
What do you think of when I say Saudi Arabia? Desert kingdom, oil producer, disruptor of sports. Here's one thing that won't come to your mind: the protector of women's rights. But the United Nations thinks otherwise. It has picked Saudi Arabia to lead a women's rights forum. It's called the CSW, Commission on the Status of Women. The body is supposed to promote gender equality, it is supposed to empower women, and the United Nations thinks that Riyadh is the perfect choice to lead it. The country's UN ambassador is now the chair of this body. Talk about irony, dying 1,000 deaths. Saudi Arabia hardly qualifies as a champion for gender equality. It has long limited rights for women. Until a few years ago, women could not drive there. They could not travel without men. Yes, it has changed now, and that should be lauded. But it doesn't make them the shining beacon of women empowerment. Take a new law there, for example. It's called the Personal Status Law. Passed in 2022, it has some rules for women. A woman must have a male guardian's permission to marry. She must obey her husband in a quote-unquote reasonable manner. Plus, there are clauses for financial support. It depends on the wife's obedience. That's the word they've used. And you heard it right, obedience. Financial support depends on a woman's obedience to her husband. Now, Riyadh says the new law is progressive. We say if this is progressive, you wonder what regressive looks like. So how did Saudi Arabia get the post? The United Nations has 5 regional groups. Posts are rotated between them. One country holds the chair for 2 years. The Philippines had this position. but it was under pressure. The Asia Group wanted it to step down and to give it to another country. Bangladesh was supposed to take over, but Saudi Arabia jumped in. It lobbied for the post. No one contested, so the Saudis got it. And they're now heading the Women's Rights Forum. Guess which other country is part of this? Iran, a country where women die because of headscarves, where women are penalized for showing a strand of hair. That same country is on this women's rights body. Sounds almost farcical. But it's not a first for the United Nations. They have a long track record of doing this. Take the UN Human Rights Council. China is on it, the same China that detains more than 1 million Uyghurs. The United Nations itself has accused China of human rights abuses, yet Beijing sits on a UN body meant to protect the same rights. It's like functioning in some alternate universe. In 2003, Libya was elected to head the UN Human Rights Commission. At the same time, it was being ruled by Muammar Gaddafi, a brutal dictator with very little regard for human rights, yet Libya under him was leading the UN body. Same with North Korea. In 2022, North Korea assumed leadership of a top disarmament group. This is a country that fires missiles like there is no tomorrow, yet they were heading a UN disarmament group. And ironically, this posting came just after North Korea fired a string of missiles. It's like making a fox guard the hen house. And all of this sounds like bad satire. It would have been funny had it not been playing out in real life, and it tells you a lot about the United Nations. Once hailed as a great hope for mankind, it has turned out to be such a disappointment. It's become a den of mind-numbing bureaucracy, undemocratic politics, and institutional cover-ups. The UN continues to defend these appointments. It says they're based on the principle of universal participation, but participation cannot happen blindly. What the United Nations needs is reform in every way, or it risks losing whatever little credibility it has left and becoming more irrelevant by the day. When you were a child, do you remember what your parents told you? If you did not want to finish a meal, what were you told? Don't waste your food. There are children starving in many parts of the world, so finish everything on your plate. And it seems that collectively, the world ignored this advice. It's official. We've all been wasting food at an unprecedented scale. A new United Nations report says humans squander 1 billion meals every single day, a billion with a B. This is taking place even as food insecurity is on the rise and food inflation refuses to slow down. Despite this, we keep wasting food. And this is costing the world $1 trillion every year. Here's our report.
132 kilograms. That's the average amount of food every human wasted in 2022. Together, we wasted more than 1 billion meals every day. This is according to a new UN report, and this took place even though food insecurity has never been higher. In 2022, 783 million people faced acute hunger. A third of all humans faced food insecurity. But at the same time, food kept going to waste. Over 1 billion tons of food was wasted in 2022, and a majority of it was at the household level. 60% of all food waste was because of us. The unfinished meals put in the fridge, forgotten, and eventually thrown out. The last few fries you threw away because they got cold. The fresh ingredients that got spoiled as you ordered takeout night after night. All of this adds up. It amounts to 60% of all food wasted. It's not just individual households that are at fault, though. 28% of all food waste was generated by food services, the restaurants, cafes, and canteens around the world. The remaining 12% was wasted by retail outlets. All those sketchy-looking vegetables you didn't buy at the grocery store, they end up in a landfill. Combined, all of this amounted to over 1 billion tons of food wasted in 2022. And this isn't even the full picture. This is only a count of final food products. A lot is wasted during the harvesting and transport phases as well. Now, some of you may think that you aren't to blame. You never waste a meal. It must be the rich countries that are to blame. Sadly, that isn't the case. Per capita, people in poorer nations wasted only 7 kgs less than their counterparts in the global north. Food waste barely varied with a nation's wealth, and there's a scientific explanation for this. Many of the poorer nations are located near the equator. They face hotter temperatures, and so food spoils faster. Fresh meals are also more common in lower-income countries, which again spoil faster than processed junk. This brings waste levels between rich and poor nations at par. So we are all to blame. And all this waste has a real-world impact. You know what they say about demand and supply? The higher the demand, the higher the price. So our wastefulness is actually making food more expensive for everyone around the world. Then there's the climate problem. Wasted food is biological waste. When it goes into landfills, it decomposes and emits methane, a potent greenhouse gas. So that salad you wasted is contributing to global warming. Food waste is far more harmful than you might think. The UN report says it leads to about 10% of the world's annual greenhouse gas emissions. That's 5 times more than the entire aviation sector. Hunger, inflation, global warming. Food waste is contributing to all of this. We need to change course now to have a chance to wipe the slate, or should we say plate, clean.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Lebanon, a major diplomatic confusion. Their Prime Minister mistakes an Italian aide for Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. In Brazil, Presidents Macron and Lula launch a submarine built with French technology. And in Paris, chocolatiers embrace the sports theme for Easter in a nod to the upcoming Olympics. Finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1930, Constantinople was renamed as Istanbul. It was done by Ataturk's government. The name Istanbul was already used colloquially. The renaming was an attempt to move away from Turkey's Ottoman past. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.